Yeah, no, I'm ready.
Angel and I affirm today's topic. Contention 1 is education. Harvard economists Claudia Golden and Lawrence Katz find that almost 70% of income inequality is due to the disparity in educational attainment. Prioritizing public infrastructure reduces this gap and ultimately reduces income inequality. Overcrowding currently plagues the American public school system. Doug Harris from the Brookings Institute writes that average school size has increased 9% since 1980, and currently 22% of American schools are overcrowded. Jeannie Oakes of UC Berkeley finds that in overcrowded schools, students find it more difficult to pay attention and absenteeism is much higher, resulting in reduced student achievement. PolicyLink reports that 90% of children in overcrowded schools are children of color, resulting in a large racial achievement gap. Fortunately, Valerie Lee from UCLA writes that the only solution to this problem is the construction of new schools. In fact, Jeremy Finn from the University of Buffalo finds that 3 years in smaller class sizes increases the chance of high school graduation by 67%. This leads to two benefits. The first is less people dependent on welfare in the future. Dana Mitra from Penn State University finds that high school dropouts were 3 times more likely to receive welfare from public assistance than high school graduates who did not go on to college, meaning that high school graduation is often the difference between living in poverty and out of it. But second, reduced income inequality. Mitra furthers that states with more education spending have lower income inequality. Joshua Hyman finds that reduced class sizes increase college attendance by 11%, leading to a host of long-term benefits. A meta-analysis by Monza University finds that smaller class sizes disproportionately help the lower classes and reduce the black-white gap for college entrance exams by 54%. Overall, Roland Fryer of Harvard University concludes that reducing the black-white educational gap reduces racial income inequality by almost 30%. Contention 2 is employment. Since the inception of welfare programs, they have always been designed as a last resort safety net for families that cannot work for money. On the other hand, public infrastructure creates circumstances so that families never need to rely on the government because they have a quality job. The Center for American Progress writes that the best pathway out of poverty is employment because it provides long-term, dependable sources of income. There are 2 ways infrastructure benefits employment. First, by increasing job access. The Mineta Transportation Institute finds that among people on welfare, 60% said that transportation was the biggest obstacle to finding a job. In fact, Elizabeth Kanner from Harvard University furthers that access to just about anything associated with upward mobility relies on efficient public infrastructure. A study by NYU found that improving public transit can reduce unemployment rates by 3% in certain neighborhoods. The second way transportation benefits employment is through job creation. Beth Ann Bovino, the United States chief economist, writes that investing just 1% of GDP will create 1.5 million jobs in the construction sector and adds 1.7 percentage points back to the GDP. The EPI also calculates that a $250 billion investment boosts overall employment by 3 million net jobs in just 1 year. This yields 3 unique impacts. The first is that jobs create opportunities specifically for the poor. In fact, the Brookings Institute found that 88% of the 14.2 million infrastructure jobs go to people who cannot afford college education. But second, the jobs are long-term. The Brookings Institute reports that 81% of created jobs are for the operation of infrastructure, meaning that the jobs don't disappear after the project is completed. Compare this to welfare, which has been proven to reduce the incentive to work and earn, as quantified by David Bass, who found that every $1 of government welfare received decreases earned income by 80 cents. But the third impact is that wages are higher for low-income workers. The Economic Policy Institute finds that 9 out of 10 jobs are middle-wage jobs, meaning that low-income workers get a unique opportunity to move into the middle class. Based on data from 76 countries until 2010, Senate Vitrani and Son in 2013 find that both the quantity and quality of infrastructure reduce economic inequality significantly, lowering the Gini coefficient, which is the most widely used metric of inequality, by 0.18 and 0.19 respectively, which is in total a net reduction of income inequality by 37%. And for those reasons, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot.
Can I ask some clarification? So this NYU evidence about like a 3% decrease in employment, that's Kaufman, right?
It might be. I'm not 100%.
Okay, can you, instead of calling for the just tell me if that's wrong. And then the vast evidence, can I see that?
Alright. You will use Greg? Yeah. Alright.
Why? No. Nice, 30 seconds.
I didn't count that, so alright.
Cool. Okay. And just give, you don't have to do it now. You can do it later.
No, it wasn't Kaufman. It was Curdles.
Kaufman.
It was Curdles.
Okay, can I see it then?
Yeah, sure.
You're doing a real prep this time, or you're going to do one
Yeah, you can give it to me during cross-sex if you want, or can I look at it during?
Yeah, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, that's good. So,
I'll 18.
Is that really necessary?
I don't want to hold my blind off.
Fair enough. I just think it's an intimidation factor where no one can do it.
They're not intimidated by me.
They intimidated you guys when we faced you.
I wouldn't. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to see my face.
It's even more intimidating. Just a laptop.
During Grand Cross.
Okay.
Stool there.
Okay. Alright, is everybody ready?
I guess.
We negate. Contention 1 is entrenching supremacy. Bullard of Texas Southern University writes that racial prejudice has been the principal decision maker behind infrastructure-related policies in the United States. Historically, the New York Times explains that government housing policies have pushed minorities into segregated inner-city neighborhoods with high poverty rates and few opportunities for escape. According to McCarthy of Smith College, this ongoing American legacy of institutional racism has denied millions of blacks the infrastructure necessary to address unemployment, political exploitation, and other social problems. Prioritizing infrastructure magnifies this oppression in two ways. First, the distribution gap. Avila of the University of Minnesota argues that the financing of infrastructure follows the inscriptions of race and class. While spending within affluent communities is generous, it is minimal or absent in regions where the poor are historically concentrated. Randazzo of the Reason Foundation confirms that more than 85% of all government infrastructure grants went to communities with household incomes far above the national average. Second is urban dislocation. Soman of the George Mason University observes that governments typically use new infrastructure projects as excuses to target and remove racial minorities. Lipsis of UC Santa Barbara empirically confirms that federally assisted renewal projects destroy black housing units 2 times more often than white ones. Dislocation intensifies inequality, as Hartman of the American Bar Association points out that the cost of living for those forced out of their homes is 53% higher. Fortunately, means-tested programs are colorblind. The Center for Welfare Information explains that welfare eligibility is open to every citizen in the United States with a guarantee of equal opportunity. Contention 2 is the safety net. Pettinger of the Center for American Economic Health contends that the primary purpose of welfare is to maintain a minimum standard of living for those suffering difficult times to foster upward mobility later down the road. Expanding welfare helps the poor bounce back in 3 ways. First, by subsidizing job seekers. The CWI explains that one of the basic criteria for means-tested welfare is that recipients work towards someday leaving the program. Jobless Americans fall back on welfare to survive in the short term so they can find jobs in the long term. This is important because Lieber of MIT finds that sudden poverty makes people more short-sighted. Those who live without their basic needs are more likely to make ill-advised decisions. Fortunately, Jusko of Stanford explains that the safety net provides around 47% of the financial support necessary to cover for an entire family's basic necessities, freeing up time and resources for the poor. DeParley of the New York Times thus impacts that expanding welfare in 2008 cut joblessness by 21%, while the U.S. Department of Commerce quantifies that the most recipients are off welfare in less than 2 years. Second, by breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty. This happens in 2 ways. First, child poverty. Greenstein of the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities explains that welfare helps families with children afford basic necessities. The safety net reduces aversive stress factors that parents and children experience if they can't put food on the table, thereby easing negative effects that poverty has on neurological development early in life. The Public Policy Institute of California adds that the safety net programs ameliorate issues like food insecurity, homelessness, and inadequate schooling, all of which hurt children more than any other age group. The CDF thus indicates that expanding underfunded welfare programs would cut child poverty by 60% and increase access to resources for 43 million kids. On the long term, people are 3 times more likely to fall back into poverty after being poor early in life. Second is family makeup. The St. John's Law Review notes that the reason behind declining marriage rates in America is an increase in incidence of poverty. Marriages are less likely to happen without financial independence. Yoshikawa of NYU notes that each $1,000 boost in earnings is associated with a 108% increase in the incidence of marriage. Wilcox of Slate finds, in comparison to every other imaginable influence on inequality, family structure is by far the strongest and most robust predictor of upward mobility because children from stable 2-parent families experience more parental attention and higher household incomes. The U.S. Census Bureau found that single-parent homes are 4 times more vulnerable to severe poverty. Cumulatively, Sherman of the CBPP concludes that means-tested benefits have lifted 19 million people above the poverty line, while the holistic safety net has cut potential incidences of poverty in half. However, it is still in need of expansion, as Cohen of the nonprofit Quarterly reports that Congress has turned a deaf ear to safety net programs, with funding requests for welfare billions of dollars below budgetary requests. And for these reasons, I strongly urge vote for con. Yes, you can.
All right, so this is just a preliminary question. Which is a more long-term solvency for income inequality, getting a job or getting welfare?
Welfare. And the reason for that is to get a job, you need to have welfare in the short term because people.
Okay, but is it
poverty-
the welfare that is the long-term solution, or is it when they get the job that is the long-term
No,
solution?
we argue that welfare is a prerequisite to jobs. Before
Okay.
we can even access jobs, they need to be in the short. They need to stay afloat in the short term, or they end up in a
All right,
permanent
so
poverty trap.
when you
Wait,
guys
can I take a question?
okay, yeah, go.
Okay, so these, like you talked about education, right? So if you fund these low poverty schools that are struggling, what's the guarantee that they will produce high quality education enough for social mobility?
Okay, like what we're telling you is that you're building new schools, right? So you're hiring new teachers,
Okay.
you have like better training for them.
But you talked about class sizes, so like that evidence doesn't matter, you're just building new schools, correct?
Wait, how would building new schools not reduce class sizes?
Not reduce class sizes?
Reduce.
Oh, you're talking about overcrowding. Okay, that's cool.
All right, yeah. So let's talk about. So yeah. So in your second argument, when you talk about like welfare helps people find jobs, right?
Right.
What welfare programs attach conditionality to receiving welfare?
Right, so we're saying that doesn't exist right now, and we need to implement that.
Alright, so you're-
in
so-
the rebuttal, Max is gonna I don't want to reveal too much of our strategy, but we're gonna talk about work incentives for welfare and how that'll
All right. So you're saying that there are not programs right now that have conditionality for receiving welfare, but you guys want to create that?
Well, right now there's like the TANF, which I guess does that, but like I don't think
Actually,
every
TANF doesn't have conditionality.
well, it leads to employment, but like I'm just that doesn't matter. I'm saying that we want to create a workfare-related welfare
So
system.
you guys agree that this
gives
resolution
jobs.
just talks about increasing funding for welfare,
All
right?
right,
You guys don't have fiat to
okay, look,
create
Ani,
new
we
welfare
have
programs.
cards for all that. You can like answer it after Max makes the
Okay,
argument.
yeah, sure. Go.
So okay, on your second contention about employment, right?
Mhm.
Do you know what the minimum unemployment, like theoretically, of like an economy is, like the U.S.
I think
economy?
it's like 3%.
Yeah, right. So like, if we can never get like 100% unemployment, right? So like, wouldn't welfare be necessary to help the people at the very bottom who
Look,
don't have jobs?
we're not saying that you get rid of welfare completely. Like, welfare is obviously going to exist. We're just saying that infrastructure spending is more important. That's all we're proving this debate. So that question doesn't really get you anywhere. So in your first argument, when you talk about distribution of wealth, right? Or when you talk about supremacy, you say that like putting people in, like the government policies are pushing people into these like ghettos and stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, like we're saying that like infrastructure benefits don't benefit everyone equally.
All right.
But
So
yeah,
if we can prove to you that government infrastructure projects primarily go to poor rural areas, would that solve the problem that you guys are talking about?
If you prove that, you'd be lying because like.
Okay, actually, let's talk about that. The piece of evidence you read, which says 85% of infrastructure projects go to low-income communities, is actually talking about welfare. We've discussed how this piece of evidence is actually is on the wrong
That's
side,
so
right?
He's so right.
But it's talking about what? Don't do this. Okay, fine. The Hartman analysis says that 53% of what the cost of living for those forced out of their
Okay,
homes.
so
is
that,
53%
but the
higher.
link to that is that 85% of infrastructure goes to rich communities.
No, like we have a lot of link cards. Like Soviet and Lipsitz are also links that say that the government's primarily focused on rich communities.
Can I see the 85%?
You have it, dude.
Yeah, we do have it.
We can
Yeah,
take
we
that.
know
I'll read a
it's-
separate card that says the exact same thing in the next page.
Okay, we'll start,
Why don't you read that card? You talked about an index.
That's hella true. We told them the index.
we asked for the card. Okay. All right, we'll
That was
start.
a terrible decision.
We'll start prep time now.
It's chill. It's chill.
Told me that.
We want to wait for the audio or whatever.
Minute left.
Seconds left.
17 seconds. I got it.
I have 20.
Okay, sure. We'll go with 20.
Okay.
Alright, you guys ready?
Yeah.
My time starts now. Remember what Ani asked Keshav at the beginning of cross-examination. When coming out of poverty and to alleviate income inequality, the best solution is getting a job because that's more long-term. We're going to prove that the creation of jobs and the longevity of jobs is going to be better in the affirmative world, so when you're deciding which one to prioritize, look to the one that has a more stable and long-term impact. Just because both sides impact to income inequality, the way you're going to be prioritizing the affirmative is because we do it through creating jobs, not just giving people money to apparently look for jobs and not actually increasing employment in the long run. But with that in mind, let's go to their first argument about supremacy. First, an overarching response to the entire contention. Remember, our first argument solves for this. We are telling you that the black-white racial achievement gap is decreased significantly. In fact, by 54% in college entrance exams. And the separate card by Harvard University tells you that by reducing this by that much amount, we are decreasing racial income inequality by 30%. Now remember, their impact is talking about like racial prejudices and stuff. That's not what the resolution is asking for. It's asking for income inequality. And given that we're reducing the racial income inequality, that's why you're going to be buying the affirmative side. But next, go to their two impacts. First, they talk about the distribution gap. Two main responses here. First, according to the study, most of the public works projects actually go to resource undeveloped areas in places where there are poor people. In fact, you're going to be seeing this as a benefit because you're not going to be seeing how more of it goes to affluent neighborhoods. But second, and more importantly, you're going to turn the 85% card that they talk about. This 85% card talks about welfare. That's the reason you're not going to be buying my opponents and turning this whole entire argument against them, because 85% of welfare goes to places where there is more affluent people. But next, go to their second impact about dislocation. Two main responses here. First, recognize that dislocation, three responses. First, the evidence that they read is from the 1960s in the highway construction projects that happened that displaced some people. But second, and more importantly, it benefits the poor. In fact, when property values rise by 6% with increased infrastructure, this benefits the poor because they live in an area that is better off, and now they have a higher credit score, and it makes it easier to buy stuff. That leads to long-term stability, and you're not going to be seeing this fluctuation in stability happening in the long run. But second and third and finally, people in these gentrified areas are 15% less likely to leave, meaning that they are going to be in these richer neighborhoods for a longer amount of time compared to being non-gentrified. At that point, you turn this argument against them because the infrastructure increases the property values in the region. For example, public transit increases the property value by 41%, and this benefits them in the long run in terms of economic standing. But next, go to their second argument about the safety net. First, they talk about job seekers. A number of responses here, but first and most importantly, Ani tells you that it decreases the incentive to work because people make more money on welfare than off of welfare. In fact, for every $1 of welfare, it decreases their earned income by 80 cents. And because welfare isn't taxable income, this doesn't contribute to income equality. But second, look to the welfare cliff. The welfare cliff basically says that as soon as you get off welfare, you actually make less money than when you're on welfare. People are motivated to do whatever gets them more money in the short term. And that's when people are going to be seeing how they want to stay on welfare. That's going to disincentivize work and long-term job creation. But compare this to the affirmative world, where we're showing you 3 million jobs are created disproportionately for the lower class who don't have any college education. That's going to be seeing a long-term benefit because 81% of these jobs are operation jobs, meaning that they build this stuff and then they work on the stuff without necessitating this college education and training. But next, go to their second point about poverty traps. They talk about child poverty. Child poverty is actually extended in the negative world with more welfare. In fact, it leads to dependency and traps where a first-generation child is 5% more likely to be on welfare, and a second-generation child is 15% more likely to be on welfare. That's a long-term impact to how welfare is not going to be beneficial. Now next, go to their marriage. Welfare has historically been the disruption of a lot of marriage. In fact, what happens is when a single mother marries a man, it decreases the welfare that they receive and has actually caused a lot of divorce and caused people to split apart. That's really important because they're not going to be garnering the impact because welfare disincentivizes marriage and you don't get any of the benefits that my opponents are talking about. Remember, at the end of the day, look to the long-term job creation and long-term sustainability. Infrastructure provides those tools, and that's why you should be prioritizing it. Thank you.
All right, so can I see those cards as well?
Which one?
Was it 4% or 6%?
Oh,
yeah, like access, and then the 1 to 80 cents.
80 cents.
Yeah, the $1. The best stuff. Yeah.
like that little spinning ball thing. So give us a couple seconds.
It's fine.
He's just taking them off a little.
Honest is high.
Tell her I said hello first.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I want to click on, because it's citing this, right? That says Kaufman.
I'm sorry, it won't let me look at that.
Okay, and let me pull Kaufman, so it's the same URL. Okay, I'll run trap for that. Okay.
You got it? So just see your own stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm not worried about
Sorry, sorry.
that. Dude, it is Kaufman. I'm so mad right now.
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. You didn't know. Slide prep.
I didn't type. I have it, no worries.
Okay.
148.
Yeah. Okay, you can keep going.
Running it now.
Alright, stop.
125 left.
Alright, just give me that case. Review. Yeah. On education, suggesting that 70% of inequalities because of your education level. What Sarah McLennan of the University of Wisconsin finds is that differences in family structure explain over 50% of the schooling differences between whites and blacks because more stable families can afford better educational resources for their kids. If we win our second contention, a lot of the arguments here flow to the net. But then move on to where they say racial inequality is worsened by educational disparities in the status quo. This is a reason to negate. Cassandra Harvard of the University of Baltimore writes that the current federal funding system is deeply inequitable and fails to direct funding so as to the economically challenged population. This is because Jillian White of the Atlantic warns that institutional racism plays a key role in underfunding minority schools. Districts are often color-coded based on racial composition, where regions with more white students receive substantially higher funding than districts with more minority students. Thus, Dennis Condren, the American Sociological Association, writes that for every $1 that goes to poor schools, 3 go to rich schools, which only increases inequality in the long run. That doesn't solve their impact. But then their first impact here is that high school dropouts are 3 times more likely to use welfare. They don't tell you how this interacts with inequality at all. We say that people are out of social safety nets within 2 years, so worst case is some kids temporarily dip under the poverty line and climb back up. They don't get any offense here. But then they say that smaller class sizes reduces college entrance exam disparities by 54%. First, they don't prove that these entrance exams are good ways of evaluating actual educational achievement. But second, they don't prove they meet the threshold for what is defined as a smaller class in their study. Obviously, it's not a difference of 1 student per classroom. They need to prove that they meet the threshold by building infrastructure, especially if most of the money goes to rich schools. But finally, on their impacts, Krugman of the New York Times writes that even if education doesn't prove, there's no evidence that a skills gap is holding employment back or wages. Elise Gold of the Economic Policy Institute indicates that highly educated workers are not in demand enough to see their incomes rise, but rather the greatest wage losses in 2015 were among those with a degree, which is why Kaspanari of the American Journal of Economics looks at 25 different countries with similar conditions and finds that the direct effect of education spending is unequalizing and leads to a slanted distribution of earnings. Go to contention 2 where they talk about employment, first about access. Their NYU solvency comes from Kaufman. Kaufman's data set looks at 16 metro areas with the most opportunities for employment, such as New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Washington. It's not a real representation of the actual country, and if we prioritize all across the country, they're not going to get those impacts. But specifically, Bullard of the San Francisco School of Law indicates that unequal access to infrastructure has fueled inner-city segregation to the point where less than 6% of all federal funding dollars are allocated to metropolitan urban areas where the poor are located. If you you want to kick Rondazzo from in-case, go ahead, but Bullard says the same exact thing. Don't buy their turn because it's about welfare, but not means-tested welfare. It's not offense for anyone. You can still send Bullard, who says that 6% of all money goes to metropolitan areas. The other 94 goes to the urban or the rural areas that don't need it specifically. The accessibility gap is only closed in suburban areas where the mostly rich residents live, which means they get no offense here. Accessibility doesn't go away. Even then, their impact card is like not true. Now let's go to the job creation warrant. There's two terms here. The first is that informal employment increases. Yvonne Liu of the Public Research Organization observes that compared to other sectors, infrastructure employers are twice as likely to keep workers unclassified on official payrolls. Unfortunately, these informal workers earn half of what their formal counterparts do and are 3 times more likely to live in severe poverty. But head of the WTO furthers that informal workers have fewer opportunities for formal education and human capital growth, creating a poverty trap to the point where a 3% increase in the size of the informal economy raises income inequality by 8%. But second is PPPs. Alexander Galedovich at Yale indicates that governments allocate new funding towards projects by contracting out construction to private businesses in what's known as a public-private partnership, or a P3. This is meant because the Partnership for Working Families writes that private companies naturally seek to maximize profit, which incentivizes cutting corners and reducing wages, which is why the OAW finds that only 8% of contracted workers earned enough to rise above the poverty threshold. Then they reach UDPI evidence saying that middle-class wage operational jobs are created. This only talks about like construction jobs in the short term. 2 issues. First, James Shirk of the Center for Data Analysis explains that most workers hired on new federal construction projects would come from existing projects, not employment lines. We already have enough workers. But second, Shirk adds that construction only has 0.2% of all employs only 0.2% of all workers in America. Even if we double the number of people in that sector, it would have a nominal effect on overall employment. But now he gives you the Sun analysis that says that there's a 0.18% shift, or sorry, 0.18 unit shift in the Gini coefficient. What the economist explains is that the Gini index is not a measure designed to solely address income inequality. It accompanies not just inequality of income, but basic consumption and wealth accumulation, which skews their impact to an unweighable level because unlike income, wealth can be inherited. It doesn't talk about income. It's not a good measure of how we're doing to fight inequality. Instead, you should prefer Tarnowski of the University of Washington, who says that as a result of the increase in wage investment in infrastructure, wage inequality increased by 8.45% in OECD countries, which isolates 4 places like the United States with similar conditions. That's why you should negate. Good?
Yeah.
All right, on the first question.
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it. 1 second.
All right.
Okay. So let's specifically talk about like your response to our second argument about employment, right?
Sure.
So you guys talk about like these PPPs that are used, correct?
Yeah.
Do these like private investors actually engage in these PPPs? Like, what is the rate of use for them?
It's a new trend. So what the Yale evidence says is that from now to like in the future, we're going to be using PPPs because they've been substantially cheaper.
Okay, can you prove that that's actually going to happen? Because a number of studies have said that the private corporations are not going to invest in it because it's just such a bad investment for the private corporations to make.
Wait, why is it like there's no investment for them? They're just getting money from the government to build
No,
stuff.
that's not like that's just government still spending the same amount of money, right?
Yeah, so why is it a bad investment for like
But
the private
then why would they
organizations?
cut corporations why would they cut corners if they're getting the money?
They want
They
to
don't have to
maximize
pay that,
profits.
right?
Okay, so here's how it works. Let's say there's like a CEO and he has like 10 workers, right? He wants to make as much money as possible out of the contracts that the government gives him, so he undercuts the wages of those 10 workers so
Let me
he
just
can
ask you a
accumulate
quick
more
question
wealth.
about that.
Yeah.
What are informal workers? Like, what
So
is the
the
difference
informal
between that
workers
and
are people
formal
who aren't on official payroll, so they're not technically employed, but they're still working. And that's the
So
other
that's
end
just
of like
like-
P3s, right? Instead of
And
like
so the
working for
harm
a
of
private-
that is that they get paid less?
Not only do they get paid less, but they also are denied opportunities to apply to things like, for
Okay,
example,
so is
welfare
that
or
better than
formal
having
education.
no job at all?
I would argue yes, because it traps you in a cycle of poverty where you can't access human capital
Wait,
development.
okay, but compared to having no job,
Okay,
that
so
would be
the
much
only
better.
carded analysis on this, like right now in the round, comes from the Bachata evidence from WTO that says that a 3% increase in the informal economy increases income inequality by 8%. Can I get a
A
question? really quick?
3% increase in the informal
The
economy?
size of the informal.
And how much does it increase within?
We would say that, like, I'm not saying that we
Is
need
it
to
only
get that
because
8%.
0.2%?
No. I'm not saying that we need to get that 8% number. I'm just saying there's a direct correlation between informal workers and inequality.
Okay,
So
sure.
yeah, let's
You
talk
can
about
ask-
your case specifically on education, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to make the argument that like these like Pell Grants, sorry, not Pell Grants,
No.
that these class sizes have like a key role in like increasing wages by like 67% in the long run, right?
Well,
Or like
less,
3
less,
years of education or something like that.
Alright, yeah, so we said it increases high school graduation rate by 67% and increases the like total
Right.
time of school by 3
Right,
years.
and then
But
like
that's
a lot
just
of your that's fine. But like a lot of your impacts are about like graduation rates, right?
Yeah.
So like where do you contextualize how like a better diploma actually increases wages in the long run?
Alright, so the Brookings Institute analyzed this and found that between 1979 and 2013, all of the drop in median income was because of the difference in graduation rates based on like college and high school.
Okay,
so
that's
we are
fine.
telling let me finish it. We are telling you that you increased the graduation rate by 67% for high school dropouts. And, like your response was talking about our first argument, right? Our first impact, talking about like less dependent on welfare.
Well, that's,
but the
I
second
mean
part.
responses to all your impacts.
I know, but like that part where you say we don't impact back to income inequality, like we do that in the second impact, where we talk about reducing racial inequality by like a full 30% and increase the college graduation
let's
rate
deal
by
with that,
11%.
right? If we prove that more money flows to like the white privileged schools and not
Oh
the
yeah,
poor
that's
schools that
not
need them,
infrastructure. You got like we might spend more money like just giving
that's
money
just how
to
like
schools
state
on
and
rich.
federal funding
That's
works,
not
right?
infrastructure.
Like the warrant is that
No,
like
we
they
read
like
the
color
evidence.
code the schools, and that's how
That's
they
not
decide
infrastructure.
funding.
That's just giving money to schools. That's a completely different thing.
Okay, yeah, I'm a little confused.
Can I see the evidence of the welfare cliff?
Yeah.
While we're pulling that up, can you get us the 6% goes to metropolitan and 4%?
Yeah, it's pretty explicit. This current funding scheme is biased against metropolitan areas. Your 6% are out. And if you want, you can like find the URL and then go to the video.
It's the first one.
Oh yeah, it's just the dirt and stuff.
Alright, we'll start prep time now.
Wait, Max, you asked me that 6% goes to metropolitan areas?
Yeah.
Okay.
You good? Or?
Yeah, we're good.
No prep time? Anyone?
I know, we'll
Yes.
yeah, we'll take it.
So you have 20 seconds left, yeah?
Yeah.
Starting now.
Here.
So I'm going to start with the framework and then give two voting issues. Is everyone ready? Alright, so everyone's good? Okay. I asked K-Shop in the first crossfire which is preferable, jobs or welfare. They say jobs. Max drops that in the rebuttal speech. Extend that. The weighing mechanism in this debate round is going to be jobs because that's long-term solvency for income inequality. With that in mind, let's look to their advocacy on jobs, which is the standard. Now in the crossfire, K-Shop tells you that Max is going to elaborate on their proposal, but they never do that. That's a clean drop on their advocacy for jobs. Remember, they tell you that they're going to talk about how like you somehow create incentives for work with welfare. Once again, they never do that. You drop them on jobs. Based on the standard alone, you default to the affirmative. Now let's talk about why the affirmative wins on jobs. We tell you that the $350 billion investment creates 3 million new jobs in just 1 year. That's an impact that literally wins the round for us because that is the standard. Now we tell you that these jobs are not only are they created, but they're long-term, and with public infrastructure, you increase access to them for the poor. Now remember, we read you the evidence which tells you that 60% of people, or 60% of the people on Max's welfare programs say that the only reason they can't find jobs is because of a lack of public transportation. We solve for the problems they give you. Even there are millions of people on welfare programs right now. The way you get those people jobs, like they tell you we should do, is by adding public infrastructure. Now let's talk about why infrastructure actually doesn't have any of the disads that they give you. The EPI finds that infrastructure projects disproportionately go to underfunded places and places that are underdeveloped. So when you look to their first argument, there's no real link where they tell you that like the people are sent into these ghettos and stuff. The link is actually that infrastructure projects disproportionately go the other way. They go to places where they're actually needed. Now we tell you that means you can build new schools, which decreases overcrowding, and what that essentially means is that in the long term you reduce the racial income inequality gap by 30%. That's the biggest impact you get on this round in terms of straight income inequality. Now let's talk about why welfare doesn't work. When they talk about helping jobs and their impact is child poverty, remember the evidence Antra reads you from the National Review, which says that putting someone on welfare increases the chance that their next generation will be on welfare by 5% and the second generation by 11%. That's intergenerational childhood poverty. That's not a benefit of welfare programs. But second, they talk about marriage. But Patrick Fagan finds that welfare is actually a disincentive for marriage because when you marry, you get less welfare benefits, so you lose money actually. So you're actually disincentivizing marriage, and for those reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot.
Sounds good.
Yeah, how much do we use?
You have a minute and 25 left.
Can I call for the 15% levers?
Huh?
Intergenerational poverty,
Yeah.
first child, 5%.
Thank you. I might have said 5%.
Probably won't make a difference.
Yeah, 5% of them.
Yeah,
Maybe
okay.
50%.
It's fine, I guess.
Evidence misconstruction.
I think you wrote it as 10 earlier anyway, so it's not a big deal. Good. Okay. 52 seconds left.
Yeah, you guys can grab these.
So yeah, I'm gonna start on like the framework argument, I guess, and then go to other cases. Well, actually, I'm not gonna specifically address their case, but I'm gonna like flip it back and forth and like extend stuff on our case.
This is fine, I think I can love.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
They said the best long-term solution is jobs. We're not looking at the best long-term solution. We're looking at which one we should prioritize. The Lieber analysis said that welfare is a prerequisite to even accessing jobs because in the short term, the poor make poor decisions. They don't have that money to keep them afloat. So we need to give them welfare to keep them afloat and not let them get into like an endless poverty trap. Now go to our case. The first thing they say is that the black-white achievement gaps is solved, and they talk about prejudices, but they lose access to education because they drop the response to Maximus and Rebuttal. First, that was stable families lead to increased education. But second, the Harvard analysis says that they don't direct funding to poor. If for every $1 you give to the poor, $3 go to the rich. The third, deposit dropout rates don't lead to income inequality. And fourth, the curriculum analysis says that the skill gap isn't what's holding us back. But the second thing they say is that on the first one is that public work go to undeveloped areas. But the Bullard evidence and Maximus and Rebuttal says that 94% of spending goes to the rich. They don't read any evidence. But then they say that our evidence is from 1960s. Bullard is from 2014. But then they employment increases for infrastructure. But then extend the terms on employment that Maximus and Rebuttal. First, unclassified workers lead to fewer educational opportunities, which leads to the poverty trap. Second, PPVs leads to maximizing profit, which cuts wages. But then third, the Shirk evidence says that jobs just come from existing projects. So there's like that's terminal. There aren't any new jobs created. But now the next thing they say is that they're 15% less likely to leave, but the people who move out are still working. Next on the second contention, they said there's a decrease in time to work, and welfare leads to this. Welfare leads to like the welfare clip. But the Pettinger evidence says the purpose of welfare is to get off it eventually. So this is all back for it. But on the welfare clip specifically, first, few people actually qualify for all 8 of the programs their study looks at. And second, welfare benefits for single adults are much less generous than those for women with children. Their study doesn't account for that. Forbes has a specific article that says why their specific Cato study is bad. You should read it. You should call for it if you're confused. But finally, on the second warrant, they say that welfare leads to dependency, which leads to child poverty. But their evidence assumes that dependency happens. But the USDC evidence from our case says that most recipients are off within 2 years, so dependency doesn't happen. Finally, they say that welfare disrupts marriages. But the marriage penalty will get even higher if we don't increase welfare according to the CBPP in 2015. But second, they give you no real evidence on this. So if we're allowed to use logic as well, the marginal benefit of marriage is much far bigger than the loss of welfare because you now have 2 incomes. And for those reasons, I strongly urge to vote.
All right.
Wait.
Con.
Yeah.
When you get married, do you receive less welfare from the government?
Yes, there's a phase up.
Okay, so when you receive less welfare from the government, isn't that a disincentive to marry
Okay,
when
so
you're on
here's what
welfare?
the CBPP evidence says. It's kind of new, so I'll give you a chance to respond to it here, right? Basically what it says is that right now there's like a massive like drop off if you get married, right? But like the Cohen evidence that we read from the Nonprofit Quarterly also ties this in. It says that if we don't do anything, that phase out is going to increase by $14 billion, which means if we don't do anything, the penalty is increasing even more.
If we don't increase welfare spending,
Then the penalty increases even more, and then less people get married.
Alright, so how big of an impact does that on income
14
inequality?
billion.
Oh, I mean, like, first of all, it doesn't matter like what the impact of that has on income
Wait, why
inequality.
not?
We say that a $1,000.
Because like, okay, your guys' benefits for welfare come from two things: A, child poverty, and B, marriage. Child poverty doesn't actually impact the inequality. Or you guys?
We also talk about the
The
short-term
second-
job-seeking subsidization, but sure, let's talk about child poverty, right? So you say that child poverty doesn't impact back to inequality? Like, what's your reason?
You guys don't prove the link for that.
Why? Like, okay, so
What do
if
you mean?
we like
I don't
pull
know why
out,
you didn't
if like if we yeah, that's here. I guess you have a point there, right? So like if like low-wage workers are now able to like pay for their children's education, like you talk about, because education is really important to you, and that closes like the racial inequality gap, like you're saying, then wouldn't that solve the intergenerational poverty gap?
No, because we're like that. You guys said this study assumes that parents are dependent, but like we already
Yeah.
showed that parents are dependent because of the
No.
welfare cliff
No,
and
okay.
decreasing earning
So
income by 80%.
dependency is not true because the point of welfare, people don't want to stay on welfare. They want to get off eventually.
That-
And,
okay,
like,
we're
your
saying
whole
that's not
welfare
true
cliff-
because they
dude,
do
your
whatever
whole welfare
gets
cliff
them more
argument assumes that people are on all 8 forms of like
Right,
welfare.
so
that
we
are
told you,
applicable
we
back
told
to
you that
basic.
with the welfare cliff, right? By getting off welfare, by getting a job, they effectively lose money, right? Like we gave you the study that talked about a drop from like $18
no,
to
Angel,
$12.
they only lose money if they're on all 8 programs
Your
that have
study,
phase
your
out.
study is like lying. It's like funded by the Cato Institute. It like assumes that all families are on all 8 forms of welfare.
And like,
that's just not
dude,
true.
like more importantly, like
Wait,
the
wait,
USDC evidence makes it really clear. No,
Oh,
really
if you go to
quick.
the website, if you go to the very bottom, it says funded by the Cato Institute.
No, it just has a link to the Cato Institute, but that's fine. What's more important, right? Like, even if your entire analysis is true, the USDC evidence, the Department of Commerce, does an analysis of like pretty much everyone on welfare. It says that on average they say they're on 2 years, right? So like even if the cliff is true, like they're still getting off within 2 years.
There's a couple problems with that, right? Like you guys are the ones that say poor people make bad decisions, right? When they are off of welfare, like they make bad decisions inherently according to
Okay.
you guys.
Like in,
That doesn't
okay,
matter.
look,
So
if you guys say
let's
they're
leave it at that
short-sighted,
because I don't
you guys,
think
K-Shop said that they're short-sighted when they're poor, right?
Yes,
Because,
sudden poverty
in
makes them
the
short-sighted.
short term, they get more money by being on welfare. That's what the welfare
No,
cliff
no, no.
explains,
So
right?
what-
Even
what
besides
the-
the welfare cliff, like
Yeah, let's deal with the Lieber analysis, right? Because I think you guys are misrepresenting it. It says that sudden poverty makes people short-sighted, so they like make decisions that benefit them sooner than later, right?
Exactly.
So if
exactly.
they stay
Why
on
would they look
welfare,
for a job? They'd rather get the welfare in the short
So
term.
your argument is that like, okay, sure, like they'd rather just stay on welfare forever, right? But the CWI evidence says that the main criteria for welfare in the first place is in order to get off the program at some point. And
You guys
either way, it
never
doesn't
proved
co-opt the
there's a
analysis
you guys-
that like people get off on
You guys
average
never
of 2
proved that
years.
there's a program that
Yeah,
actually
that's
has
fine.
conditionality.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you guys can make the analysis in the next speech.
We're out. Alright, so at the beginning of his last summary speech, he says, you need to look to whatever's long, like we just say that jobs are long-term, that doesn't mean we prioritize. Ani and I are telling you, you prioritize the long-term benefit. Now that that's out of the way, look to how we win on jobs. Remember, they cannot have an impact to jobs because Max never actually impacts it in the rebuttal speech. And remember, they just talk about like this informal economy is more likely. They don't tell you how big it is, they just say it's more likely. They don't tell you the overall effect of it. But now look how Ani and I have won our second argument. First, we give you 3 different impacts. First, we say that the jobs disproportionately go to low-income people. Remember, 88% of the jobs are going to people that don't have a college degree. Second, they are long-term benefits. 81% of the jobs are operation jobs, meaning that they're not short-term. And third, they are higher paying. 9 out of the 10 jobs are middle-class wages that are going to people that didn't get a college education. That is going to be critical because we're showing you we're transitioning people from lower income to middle class. But remember, they said that it comes from like pre-existing jobs and it doesn't actually help. Remember, 60% of people said that transportation was the reason they don't have a job. By investing in this transportation infrastructure, you give them the resources to do that. That's why the NYU study found that investing in public transportation increases employment rates by a full 3%. Remember, we are winning on jobs. Now, their only impact to jobs through welfare comes from like these child poverty and the marriage stuff like that. Remember, they're not going to be winning that debate because we have turned both of them. First, for child poverty, it increases dependency. They themselves said that if the poor people are short-sighted, that means they're going to look for welfare and not going to look to the long-term solution, which is actually getting a job. That is a very simple place to not look to my opponents. But next, they talk about marriage. Remember, you get less welfare when you're married. That disincentivizes people to actually get married. Now remember, they're going to come up here and say, like, certain programs have helped with joblessness, and that have helped with employment. Ani asked them in first cross-examination, what programs have conditionality attached to them, and they couldn't give a single program that had conditionality attached to them. That's huge, because that means they don't have any impact to jobs. Remember, we're creating 3 million jobs that are going to low-income people that are high-paying. That is a very simple place for you to reduce income inequality in the long run. Thank you.
Okay, what did we have in prep time?
20 seconds, something like that.
Yeah.
21. Maybe. Got that now? This time.
Alright.
Give me the tip. Alright, so it'll be our contention to probably like just child poverty impact and then their voters. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
That's all.
Right. They say we don't impact the jobs, but the Lieber analysis does that for you. She finds that sudden poverty makes people short-sighted, and they say that short-sighted recipients will just keep taking welfare. But first, it's a new argument in the final focus. Should have mentioned it earlier. Second, the safety net provides financial support necessary to cover basic necessities so they can free up time for them to go out and get jobs. Even if some people may want to stay on the program, we say the majority of people, according to the USDC, get off of welfare in less than 2 years. That's the real-world analysis that we give you. The only way that people can get a job, even if there are some people who become dependent, the majority of people who get off within 2 years can only do so when the government subsidizes their basic needs, because otherwise they make short-term decisions that don't allow them to get jobs, puts them more into debt, and puts them into a poverty cycle that they can't get out of. And that's where we give all the impacts that they talk about, right? Because in order to get a job, the prerequisite is that you have to have your basic needs fulfilled. And even if some people are dependent, the majority who get off in 2 years access those benefits. Now let's talk about child poverty quickly. They really undercover this. The only thing they say is that future generations are more likely to fall back onto welfare. But that study assumes that people are dependent, and we say that the majority aren't. This gives us the CDF impact that says that expanding underfunded welfare programs would cut child poverty by 60% and increase access to resources for 43 million kids. On the long term, people are 3 times more likely to fall back into poverty after being early in life. If they talk about education and job finding, we said that when you have an income and when you grow up in a richer family or a wealthier family, you are far more capable of accessing those impacts, and this is on the long term, which means it outweighs any of their short-term benefits that they don't extend through. Now let's specifically talk about jobs, which is where they basically focus a lot of their offense on. They do not respond to the shirk analysis. The majority of these construction, operational, maintenance jobs are all coming from existing employment lines. It's not going to employ people who already have no jobs, which means they don't have an actual increase in the amount of people getting jobs, which means they don't have an actual increase or decrease in income inequality. But even if you don't want to evaluate that, the informal sector turn completely responds to this, because it doesn't account for, their statistics don't account for the informal sector, because that's just what it is. They're not on the payroll. This is specifically important because the Vachetta evidence says that a 3% increase in the size of the informal economy raises income inequality by 8%, and that's the only quantification in terms of jobs and income quality that we give you in the round. So at the end of the day, 1, the jobs aren't being created, and 2, if they are, they're informal, and that worsens inequality, and child poverty solves all, so you should be in the game.
This is a really good round.